Most advice about success shares a quiet assumption that the future will cooperate with your plans. It assumes that if you set a goal and commit to it, the conditions required to achieve it will reliably be there. It assumes you'll be focused when it matters, healthy when pressure arrives, and undistracted when decisions pile up. It treats attention, energy, and clarity as if they can be summoned on demand. It assumes your motivation will show up exactly when you need it, and that discipline will override fatigue, interruptions, stress, and bad timing, that nothing unexpected will interfere. But real life rarely offers that kind of cooperation. Days get disrupted, energy drops without warning, and small problems quietly stack into large failures. Margins of safety begin with a different assumption. They assume the future will be uneven, unpredictable, and occasionally hostile to your plans. Instead of asking you to rise above those moments, they ask a more serious question. What if your system didn't require you to be at your best to survive? And once you ask that question, a deeper mistake comes into focus, one that sits underneath most broken plans. Motivation is where most people look first. They treat it as the solution, when in reality it's only a feeling layered on top of a system. Motivation is psychological. It lives in the mind, shaped by mood, energy, confidence, and emotion. Reality, however, is mechanical. It responds to constraints, friction, timing, and load, not to how strongly you want something to work. Most failures don't happen because people stop caring or lose ambition. They happen because the system they are operating inside demands perfect execution to survive. When everything must go right for a plan to succeed, the plan is already fragile. Any delay, interruption, or drop in energy becomes a point of failure. A plan that works only when you are focused, rested, disciplined, and uninterrupted is not a plan. It is a best-case scenario disguised as one. And best-case scenarios collapse the moment reality behaves like reality. If motivation isn't a strategy, then the obvious question becomes this: why do so many intelligent, experienced people keep making the same planning mistakes anyway? Even after failing before, even after learning the lesson, even after promising themselves they'll be more realistic next time. To understand that pattern, we have to look at how the human mind imagines the future in the first place. Most planning errors don't come from laziness or dishonesty. They come from a predictable way the brain tells stories about what's ahead. That tendency has a name. The planning fallacy describes a consistent mental error where people underestimate how long things will take, how much they will cost, and how much friction they will involve. It persists even when people have direct experience of being wrong before. What makes this especially dangerous is that learning doesn't fix it. Past failures feel like exceptions, not evidence, and the next plan is imagined as cleaner, simpler, and more controllable than the last. When we plan, we don't think in probabilities, we think in narratives. We picture ourselves moving smoothly from one step to the next, guided by intention and effort. The mind focuses on what we plan to do, not on everything that can interrupt it. Delays, fatigue, coordination problems, and random disruptions are treated as background noise instead of central risks. That's why planning feels honest even when it's wrong. The error isn't optimism, it's structure. The planning fallacy explains why our forecasts lie, but it doesn't tell us how to survive those lies. And that's where margins of safety enter the picture. If the planning fallacy explains why our forecasts keep lying to us, then the next question is unavoidable. How do serious systems survive when they know those forecasts will be wrong? The answer is not better motivation, clearer intentions, or stronger belief. It's something far less glamorous and far more reliable. To see it clearly, we have to step away from personal goals and look at how real systems are designed. Imagine a power grid running at 99.9% capacity. It looks efficient, optimized, and impressive with almost no energy left unused. From the outside, nothing appears wasted. Every unit of capacity is doing work. Every resource is stretched to its limit. Then a lightning strike hits. A line goes down, demand spikes, or a single component fails, and the entire system begins to cascade. What looked efficient a moment ago collapses all at once. Margins are not waste. They are the reason the lights stay on when something goes wrong. Serious systems are not built to perform well in perfect conditions. They are built to survive imperfect ones. A system without slack is not efficient. It is fragile. And fragility doesn't show up during calm periods. It only reveals itself when pressure arrives, which is exactly when you can least afford to discover it. That same logic applies far beyond power grids. Any system that must run at full capacity just to function has no room to absorb shock. When there is no buffer, every disruption becomes a crisis. And when every disruption becomes a crisis, failure is no longer a matter of if, but when. Now bring this idea down to something simple and physical. Imagine you measure a wooden board to exactly 10 feet. You mark the line carefully, confident that precision is what makes the result correct. Then you cut the board. The saw blade removes 1/8 of an inch. Suddenly the board is too short, not because you were careless, but because you planned with no allowance for the process itself. Motivation is the measurement. The margin of safety is the extra inch you add before you cut. Precision without allowance doesn't create accuracy. It guarantees failure the moment reality takes its cut. There's a simple pattern you can see across history if you stop looking for novelty and start looking for survival. Things that have lasted a long time tend to keep lasting, not because they are perfectly optimized, but because they were built with room to endure stress, error, and change. Old bridges are heavier than they need to be. Ancient institutions move slower than modern ones. Durable habits look boring compared to intense bursts of effort. They didn't survive because they were efficient. They survived because they were over-engineered. Longevity is not evidence of clever optimization. It is evidence of margin. And when you understand that, efficiency starts to look less like intelligence and more like a short-term performance that only works under ideal conditions. Motivation feels powerful because it increases arousal. It sharpens attention, creates urgency, and temporarily raises energy. But arousal has limits, and psychology has mapped those limits very clearly. This relationship is known as the Yerkes-Dodson Law. It shows that performance rises as pressure increases, but only up to a point. Beyond that point, the curve turns sharply downward. Stress overwhelms focus, mistakes multiply, and judgment begins to deteriorate. More urgency does not fix this, it makes it worse. This is why pushing harder often backfires under pressure. What feels like commitment on the inside shows up as rigidity, tunnel vision, and error on the outside. Margins of safety change where you sit on the Yerkes-Dodson curve. They keep you inside the optimal performance zone, where pressure sharpens behavior instead of collapsing it. Motivation, by contrast, keeps pushing you toward the edge, and once you cross it, effort no longer compensates for overload. A margin of safety is often misunderstood as something defensive, a buffer designed only to prevent damage. In reality, it is far more than that. It is strategic. This idea is captured by the concept of antifragility, developed by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Antifragile systems don't just survive volatility, they improve because of it. When everyone else is operating at full capacity, even a small shock can wipe them out. There is no room to adjust, no space to absorb error, and no flexibility to respond. The person or system running at 70% is different. They are the only one with enough slack to pivot, reallocate resources, and take advantage of disruption. Slack turns volatility into leverage. What looks like inefficiency in calm conditions becomes strength when conditions turn chaotic. Fragile systems fear shocks because shocks expose their limits. Anti-fragile systems benefit from shocks because those same shocks eliminate competitors who were operating too close to the edge. Now consider how this principle shows up in real high-stakes engineering. Spacecraft don't rely on a single computer. They use 3 running in parallel, constantly checking one another for errors. NASA doesn't motivate computers to work harder or hope they won't fail. They design systems that assume failure will happen and build around it. Decisions are accepted only when a majority agrees. If one system disagrees, it is ignored rather than trusted. This redundancy isn't pessimism, it's professionalism. When failure is expensive, you don't depend on motivation, you depend on structure. Most people live at redline. Their calendars are full, their money is fully allocated, and their energy is already spoken for. Every hour is booked, every dollar has a job, every unit of effort is committed in advance. There is no buffer in this system, only hope. Hope that nothing unexpected happens and that tomorrow looks exactly like today. When burnout arrives in this state, it's usually framed as a personal failure, a lack of discipline, resilience, or grit. But burnout is not a moral failure, it is a mechanical one. The real problem is load. As a system approaches its maximum capacity, the risk of failure doesn't rise gradually, it explodes. At 99% capacity, even a small shock cascades. A bad night of sleep, a minor illness, or a single disruption can trigger a chain reaction that brings everything down. At 70% capacity, the same shock barely registers. The system absorbs it and continues functioning. Motivation doesn't change this curve. Pushing harder only moves you closer to the limit. Distance from the limit is what changes outcomes. Stop planning for your best Monday, the day when you're well-rested, uninterrupted, caffeinated, and in a good mood. That version of you is not your operating baseline, it's an outlier. Instead, plan for your worst ordinary week, the kind of week where sleep is poor, your body isn't cooperating, and small problems show up all at once. Plan for illness that slows you down, transport that doesn't arrive on time, and technology that fails at the exact moment you need it. Plan for emotional drag when motivation is low and attention is fragmented. That is your real operating environment. That is the version of reality your system must survive. If your system works only on good days, it is not a system, it's a gamble. And building your life around a gamble is the fastest way to confuse hope with reliability. When you translate margins of safety into everyday life, they stop looking abstract and start looking very ordinary. They look like calendars that aren't fully booked, with open space left on purpose. They look like savings built for uncertainty rather than optimism about the future. They show up as routines designed to be sustainable, not impressive, and as commitments chosen carefully instead of stacked heroically on top of one another. None of this feels dramatic. None of it looks ambitious from the outside. It feels boring, and that boredom is the signal that the system is built to last. That's why margins of safety work when motivation eventually doesn't. At this point, a few objections usually surface, and they're worth addressing directly rather than leaving them implicit. The first is that margins of safety sound inefficient, that leaving space, time, or capacity unused feels wasteful. But efficiency without slack is theatrical. It performs well in calm conditions and then collapses the moment reality arrives. Another objection is that this way of thinking discourages ambition, that if you stop pushing at the limit, you stop growing. Margins don't reduce ambition. They protect it from collapse by giving it time to compound instead of burn out. A third objection points to people who seem to succeed by running hot, operating at full capacity for long stretches of time. We notice the survivors because they're visible. We don't see the many others who quietly burned out, stalled, or disappeared along the way. Survivorship bias is not a strategy. It's a storytelling error we mistake for evidence. Motivation assumes you'll rise to the moment when it matters most, that when pressure arrives, energy will follow and effort will close the gap. Margins of safety assume something very different. They assume the moment will overwhelm you, and they plan for that reality in advance. One approach depends on mood, timing, and internal force. The other depends on structure, buffers, and design. Only one of them survives contact with reality. Your journey toward practical wisdom begins with clarity, and I'm honored to walk that path with you. Together, we're building a world where wisdom is practical, accessible, and deeply human. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it, and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching. And as always, think deeply, live wisely.